They said it couldn't happen in Orkney, a quiet island, fewer than 22,000 people. Sheep outnumber humans, locked doors are rare, and the last murder, it happened over 25 years before. But on a cold summer evening in 1994, that peace shattered in the most chilling way possible. A masked man calmly walked into a local Indian restaurant in Kirkwall just before closing time and without saying a word shot the waiter in the face. One shot, no words, no struggle, then silence. The gunman vanished into the night like a ghost. No arrest, no motive, no explanation. And for over 13 years, absolutely nothing. But now, 3 decades later, new DNA evidence, a Prime Video documentary, and buried secrets from a family tied to military elite are dragging this case back into the spotlight. Because the man who pulled the trigger might not have been a stranger at all. He might have been one of their own. And the truth, it's darker than the island night. It was the evening of Thursday, June 2nd, 1994. The Mimutaz Indian restaurant in Kirkwall, Orkney's quiet capital, was wrapping up its day. The streets outside were nearly empty, just the hush of wind rolling off the sea. Inside, 27-year-old Shamsuddin Mahmud, known to his friends as Shamal, was finishing his shift. Then the door opened. A man walked in, dressed in black, face covered, holding a gun. Without hesitation, he raised the weapon and fired a single round directly into Shamal's face. The bullet struck just beneath his eye. He died instantly. The killer turned, walked back out. No words, no threats, just cold, calculated execution. For locals, it felt like a scene from another country, another world. This was the first murder in Orkney in over 25 years. Police rushed to the scene. The streets were locked down, but no trace of the shooter was ever found. No security footage, no witnesses who saw a getaway. Just a body, one bullet casing, and the community that suddenly realized they were not untouchable. This wasn't just a murder, it was a message. But from who and why? For months after the murder, Orkney police had nothing. No fingerprints, no clear motive, and no prime suspect. But then came a clue, one so specific, it changed everything. The bullet that killed Shamal Mahmud was a rare military-grade 9mm round, the kind not sold to civilians. Investigators traced it to a sealed batch of ammunition that was supposed to be locked away in official military storage. Only it wasn't. Turns out, some of that exact ammunition had been quietly stored in the garage of a respected man on the island, Eddie Ross, a former police officer, Army veteran, and firearms expert. He was also the father of a teenager named Michael Ross. Eddie claimed the ammunition was stored for police training, but records didn't back him up. Years later, in 2005, he was arrested and jailed not for murder, but for withholding evidence and obstructing the investigation into Shamal's death. The message was clear. Someone in that house had access to the murder weapon, and someone knew more than they were saying. But if Eddie didn't pull the trigger, could it have been his own son? At the time of the murder, Michael Ross was just 15 years old, a quiet, disciplined teenager and a standout in the local army cadets. Most people thought he was just another kid from a respectable family. But behind closed doors, there were darker threads. Michael had a fascination with military tactics, weapons, and precision shooting. He was known to wear black military fatigues in the woods, often practicing drills alone, sometimes even in the exact area behind the restaurant where the killer was believed to have escaped. Even more disturbing, when police eventually searched his belongings years later, they uncovered extremist writings, racist graffiti, and symbols of white supremacist ideology, some drawn during his teen years, including on schoolbooks and notebooks. Still, for years, he remained untouched by the investigation. There was no witness, no direct link, no motive the police could prove. The community, clinging to the belief that this couldn't have come from one of their own, refused to look too closely. But the circumstantial puzzle was forming. A military-obsessed boy, the exact same rare ammo in his father's garage, and a motive rooted in racist hatred. All it needed was one missing piece. And 13 years later, that piece finally came. For 13 long years, the case sat cold. No new leads, no public suspects, no closure. Until, in 2007, an anonymous man stepped forward with a story that would blow the case wide open. He claimed that shortly after the murder, Michael Ross had confessed to him privately, describing the shooting in chilling detail. This wasn't just hearsay. The account included specifics about the crime scene details that had never been released to the public, things only the killer could have known. Police reopened the file immediately, and when investigators reviewed earlier reports, they uncovered something they had missed or ignored. Back in 1994, multiple witnesses had described seeing a young man in black combat clothing lurking behind the restaurant just before the murder. They said he was hiding in the trees, watching the building. That description matched exactly what Michael Ross was known to wear during his army cadet drills. Suddenly, the strange drawings, the racist notes, the ammo in his father's garage, none of it looked random anymore. In June of 2008, 14 years after the killing, Michael Ross was arrested and put on trial for murder. It was one of the most high-profile cases Scotland had seen in years, and when the verdict came in, it stunned everyone. On June 18, 2008, Michael Ross was found guilty of the murder of Shamsuddin Mahmood. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years before eligibility for parole. The courtroom fell into stunned silence, because by then, Ross wasn't just a quiet teenager with dark drawings anymore. He had become something very different. In the years after the murder, Michael Ross joined the British Army. He trained as an elite sniper. He served in Northern Ireland. He completed 2 full tours in Iraq. He was decorated, respected, called a hero. But now that uniform was gone, and the mask he wore that night in 1994 metaphorically and literally was ripped away in court. During the trial, prosecutors painted a damning picture. A young man radicalized by hate, skilled with weapons, and bold enough to carry out a racially motivated execution in a town where no one expected it. But Ross never confessed, never showed remorse. To this day, he maintains his innocence. Even after the verdict, his parents stood by him fighting to appeal, arguing that the case relied on circumstantial evidence and a decades-late witness with questionable motives. But for the court, it was enough. Michael Ross, soldier, cadet, son, was now branded something else entirely. Scotland's most calculating and long-hidden killer. In prison, Michael Ross didn't disappear quietly. In fact, he nearly vanished entirely. In 2010, just 2 years after his conviction, Ross attempted to escape from prison. He smeared himself in soap, removed a security grill, and tried to squeeze through a tiny gap in a toilet block. He didn't make it far, but it sent a clear message. He wasn't settling in. He wasn't giving up. And on the outside, things were falling apart too. His father, Eddie Ross, had already been jailed for interfering with the original investigation. His mother gave emotional interviews, swearing her son was innocent. To them, the trial had been flawed, rushed, and prejudiced. Supporters rallied behind the slogan, "Justice for Michael Ross," claiming the evidence was stitched together from half-truths and old suspicions. A website launched. Articles circulated. people began questioning whether the case had been cracked too cleanly. But for many in Orkney, the pain ran deeper. The island was split. One half believed justice had finally been served. The other couldn't believe a local boy, decorated, disciplined, admired, could carry out something so cold, so racist, so calculated. Neighbors stopped talking. Families picked sides. And through it all, one truth remained. A man was dead. A killer was behind bars. And still, not everyone agreed on who really pulled the trigger. In early 2025, a quiet storm started brewing again, this time not in a courtroom, but on a screen. Prime Video announced a new docuseries titled The Orkney Assassin: Murder in the Isles. It promised never-before-seen footage, exclusive interviews, and a re-examination of one of Scotland's most disturbing and divisive murder cases. Produced by Firecrest Films, the same team behind several award-winning UK true crime exposés, the series features deep dives into the original investigation, interrogation footage, and most controversially, sit-down interviews with Michael Ross's parents, who still insist their son was framed. The documentary doesn't just revisit the crime, it reopens the entire debate. Why was Michael never arrested until 13 years later? Why were earlier leads ignored or buried? And did the military and police connections of his father delay justice or help cover up the truth? But perhaps the biggest twist of all came in episode 4, when the filmmakers introduced a second anonymous source, someone with ties to the army who claimed Ross had made deeply disturbing comments while deployed in Iraq. Comments that suggested he believed in violence as justice. Comments that eerily echoed the coldness of the original killing. As of its June release, the series has gone viral on UK Reddit threads, sparked heated podcast discussions, and reopened national interest in a case most had long forgotten. Now the world is watching. And the question isn't just whether Michael Ross is guilty, it's whether Scotland's justice system got this case right at all. The Prime Video docuseries reignited old flames, but it also lit new ones. Because buried between the polished interviews and dramatic music were pieces the series didn't explore in full. Pieces that have started spreading like wildfire through Reddit, podcast circles, and online forums. The biggest: a potential cover-up involving police and military insiders. Some believe that the original delay in arresting Michael Ross wasn't incompetence but protection. His father, Eddie Ross, wasn't just a retired cop. He was a respected firearms specialist with long-standing connections in law enforcement. He had access, knowledge, and potentially leverage. Others questioned the chain of custody for the ammo that linked the crime to the Ross household. How did sealed military rounds end up in a civilian garage? Why weren't these records flagged earlier? Then there's the timeline problem. If Michael really committed the murder at 15, why wasn't there any forensic trail leading back to him? No prints, no DNA, no footprints matching his shoes, no weapon ever recovered. It took 13 years and one mysterious witness whose identity still hasn't been made public for the entire case to crack open. And what about motive? The prosecution pushed a theory of racial hatred, but Ross had no known history of attacking anyone violently. Was it ideology, a dare, a desire to prove himself to someone? Or, as some darker theories suggest, was the murder a deliberate act of training, a live test of how far someone could go without being caught, a test orchestrated? That idea may sound like something out of a thriller, but when you stack the military ties, the controlled single shot, the perfect escape, and the silence that followed, it starts to feel a little too calculated. And that's where the doc ends. But for many, the real story is just beginning. 3 decades later, The murder of Shamsuddin Mahmud still echoes through Orkney's fog-covered streets. A single bullet, a masked killer, a silence that lasted 13 years. And now, a convicted man serving life behind bars who still says he didn't do it. This wasn't just a murder, it became a mirror. It showed the cracks in a tight-knit community. It questioned the integrity of Scotland's justice system. It blurred the lines between soldier and suspect, between justice and vengeance. Some say Michael Ross was a lone killer, twisted by hate, protected by privilege, and trained to strike without a trace. Others say he's a scapegoat, a boy turned man, blamed because the real truth was too messy, too inconvenient, and too embedded in powerful institutions to touch. The Prime Video doc lit the fire, but the story isn't over. Because buried in this case are still unanswered questions, locked files, and a town that never really healed. So now the question is yours. Did they catch a killer or bury the truth? Let us know what you think in the comments. Drop your theory. Share the evidence. Because this isn't just a story anymore, it's a conversation. And once you hear it, you can't unsee it.